So, hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us today and taking part in our interview series. It's a real pleasure to have you on and have you with us. And you've had just an amazing, rich career, obviously fueled by your passion for music, and that's had a huge impact. So, from your early days at Syracuse University, I think it was, playing in the marching band, to an assistant turned director of marketing at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and then currently as CMO at Carnegie Hall. So it's quite the journey. So today I'd love to spend a little bit of time focused on what shaped your journey. And my first question to you today is, how did your relationship with music start, and how has it evolved over time to bring you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It's an honor to join you for a conversation today. Music has been a part of my life from the very beginning. I would say that I can remember clearly going to see my first symphony concert in Albany, New York, where I grew up with my parents. They had been gifted free tickets through my school district, and the three of us went, and it was very special. But I started playing music at a young age, piano, and eventually selected the flute as my primary instrument. And I just always loved the setting of music in school when I was growing up. I loved the camaraderie of being in an ensemble and really enjoyed so much the time I spent connecting with my friends that way and getting to know new people that way. And I think that's when I went to college and ended up at Syracuse and joined the marching band, which was something I had never done in my life before. Never
Mm.
thought I'd be putting on one of those hats and those shoes. The uniforms are quite special, but it was not something I anticipated. I had elected to be a music education major, and that was a requirement as part of that program
Ah,
for my
yeah.
curriculum. So I thought, okay, let me give it a shot. And I didn't really know what to expect, I'll admit it, but I arrived on campus 2 weeks early for band camp, for my first ever band camp, and met some really incredible people that way. But actually, it was just kind of like a piece of the puzzle of figuring out who I was in the world of
Mm,
music, if you know what I
mm,
mean.
yeah.
And Syracuse was just this really dynamic ecosystem for me to explore and test things out. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't sure I wanted to be a music teacher. I'll be honest and admit that it was because I had observed a middle school choir for the very first time, another requirement of that program, and thought, oh gosh, this is not the thing that I want to spend the next 30 years of my life doing.
Mm,
And I started to explore another major, which was a music industry program. And I can very clearly remember a conversation with my mother. I called her to tell her I was changing my major, and she said, "But Sarah, I don't understand. What are you going to do? What kind of job are you going to have?" And I remember having this moment of, gosh, I have no idea. But, for the first time in my life, I think I accepted that I didn't actually know the answer to that question. And even at that
mm,
young age, we're also pressured to figure it out early
mm,
on, make
mm,
decisions about the paths our lives will take. And that's really hard, I think, for an 18, 19-year-old to do, actually.
mm,
And
mm.
I remember feeling a little bit vulnerable and a little bit defensive, as we get sometimes, but with our mothers asking questions like that.
Yeah.
But I didn't know. And anyway, that's part of the journey to getting me here today, for sure.
Well, it sounds like the course kind of did its job in a way, because it exposed you to what that would feel like as a life ahead. So you were able to then, I always think, if you're not entirely sure what you want to do in the future, it's a process of elimination, isn't it, in terms of what you don't want to
Absolutely.
do?
Yes.
So
It's
yeah, it
continue to
helped in that
test.
regard.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just like
So
marketing, right? Lots of experimentation, test and
lots
learn.
of iteration, exactly.
Exactly.
So I loved a couple of things that you were talking about there. I think obviously music is in your heart, in terms of something that you really enjoy, and also how it brings you into contact with other people. You talked about being part of an ensemble, and I wanted to just sort of poke around a little bit in terms of the role of music in our lives more generally. And how music helps us express all sorts of things and connect in different ways. And it's very, it shapes our cultures. We all have moments that we share together. And as the world is changing, it feels like we're going through so many changes right now. You know, there's lots of transitions going on, which will inevitably bring lots of innovation. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role that music has to play in shaping culture, or that you'd like to see it play more of, actually. Yeah, really interested
Sure.
in your views.
I think, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think music, at least the way I think about it, and I think the way all of us at Carnegie Hall think about it, is that it's a tool for self-expression and self-empowerment in so many ways. Some of that comes out through our work in our education and social impact programming, which is the work of our colleagues, my colleagues in the Wild Music Institute. And there's just a whole suite of programs that actually speak to this very thing. One of my favorites, I'll just share, is a program called the Lullaby Project that we've been
Mhm.
doing for more than 10 years at this point. And the Lullaby Project pairs expectant mothers who are often in very challenging circumstances. They might be experiencing homelessness, they might be experiencing health challenges. They're in a challenging circumstance while expecting. The program pairs them with a teaching artist who actually helps them to craft their own lullaby to be
Mm.
used as a bonding mechanism with their baby. And every year we have a lullaby celebration. The mothers and the teaching artists come together for a concert here at Carnegie Hall, and they perform these lullabies. And I have to tell you, a lullaby was not something personally that I have not thought much about. I don't have children.
Mm.
I think lullabies are beautiful and adorable, but as an adult listener and enjoyer and appreciator of music, it's not a format that actually comes to mind frequently. And it really wasn't until I started to check out the work coming out of this program that I thought about them more.
Mm.
But it is one of the most beautiful things I think I've witnessed in music. I think women who never thought they could create music are
Mhm.
suddenly in a position of doing so. And it is powerful and meaningful. And you can see real love being exchanged between people. And then even a further bond between the mother and the teaching artist who worked with them.
Mm.
It's just such an incredible gift to see that in person. So, I mean, I think that's just, I guess, one example to me of how music can play that role. But I think, I mean, as consumers and listeners of music, I also think that experiencing music however you are finding it, whether you're listening on your own, you're attending a live event, you're learning about a new artist on TikTok. I've been doing that recently, I'll admit it. um, you know, there's space for us to be thoughtful and be challenged about like the
Mm.
questions that we're
Mm.
asking about the world around us. Like, what does a piece of music make you think about? And
Mm.
I just think for me, it's just always been a way to reflect,
Mm.
to provide my own comfort. I'm embarrassed to admit that I think one of my Spotify, numbers was like 193 times listening to the same song last year. So, and it was probably some pop song that I was listening to while working out. But it's funny how much you can like really get into one piece of music and how it can
Yeah.
represent a moment in your life, actually.
Mm.
So I don't know if I totally answered your question, but that's a little
Oh,
bit
you
of the
did. Yeah,
things
yeah,
for
yeah.
me.
And yeah, I will also out myself and say I'd be pretty horrified if my Spotify playlist made it out into the world and everyone had access to that.
Right.
I'd like to describe my taste as eclectic, but I'm sure someone else would use different
I
adjectives.
always use that word, and I'm like, no, yeah, there's probably some trends going in some certain directions. I'll admit it. I really like pop music, that I'll admit.
But I like I like the kind of spectrum that you covered there, from something that's deeply personal and connecting, nothing more so than a parent and a child, right? That the Lullaby Project just sounds amazing, but also how music has the ability to really transcend so much, boundaries, regions, classes, just because it's so emotional and
Right.
so accessible, and you don't even need to have money. It's not, you don't have to, like, of course, if you want to learn an instrument, that's different, but enjoying music and being able to create music is a personal experience that you can do regardless of where you are in the world and what you have access to in a lot of different ways. So I think we all relate to that. It's very special, and we'd feel so much poorer without that around us, you know.
Totally agree.
Mm.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, because in our world, some concerts, I'm just going to go straight to the business of selling live events, especially
Mm.
in this post pandemic moment here in New York City. Audiences are still making their way back. I
Mhm.
think that overall, we've had a pretty healthy start to our season. At the same time, we and all of the other presenters of live entertainment around New York, at least, have returned to the volume of events that we offered for the most part, I think, before the pandemic. So I think the audience is getting there. I think the presenters are generally ready to go, and we're kind of meeting in the middle right now. And I think that the business of selling tickets, at least, has changed so much for me in the last couple of years because I've had to be thinking about customer needs, audience needs in a way that I never had to before.
Mm. Mm.
And just to give an example, I mean, I never in my life thought I would be writing language about safety protocols to attend concerts. I mean, it was just a mind blowing kind of moment in time
Mm.
uh, to be facing that alongside our audiences. And we really put out communications that were meant to express a commitment to our audiences, that we were in it together, that we didn't
Mm.
necessarily know the path forward. There was a lot of transparency with audiences, a lot of flexibility. There remains a lot of flexibility. I think we all have learned to be better communicators with our audiences over the last couple of years. But to get more directly at your question, I think that some concerts do really well, others do not. They all have value. And they all have value for the people in the room. And I'll never forget earlier in my career when I was at Jazz at Lincoln Center, my then boss, our leader, the managing and artistic director, Wynton Marsalis, told me, because he was always wanting to know about ticket sales. How's the show going? What's going on? How's the house going to look? Um, he told me how meaningful it was for him, even though it was hard when he went on tour somewhere and there was a very small audience in the room. He said, my father always told me it didn't matter, that
Mm.
the people who were there were going to have an experience and that you had to do your best no matter what. So I carry that with me in terms of when I'm looking at a concert that's not selling the way I would hope it to.
Mm.
Really thinking about the artist on stage and the experience they're going to have, as well as the audience that is there. And just every time someone sits down in a theater, it's another opportunity to have an impact. And hopefully, our business will right side itself and that the big ones will help take care of the smaller ones. And it
Mm.
nets out
Mm.
at the end in a way that we can sustain and manage it.
I want to ask you a final question. Having had the career that you've had and made the choices that you have, I'd be really interested in what advice you have to pass on to. You clearly love what you do,
I
and
do.
you're really enjoying it. So maybe share some top tips and some advice that maybe you would have found useful, or you've had to learn the hard way and can share with others now.
Yeah, sure. I think that one thing I feel like I did learn early on was to tell everyone I meet what I'm interested in because it's funny, you just never know the connections that might emerge.
Mm.
And just to give you an example, I in college, I remained close, very close, and I'm still close to this very day with my high school band director, whose name is Jerry Zaffitz. And when I was in early high school, Jerry invited me, along with his son, who I was friends with and who I played in the band with. I joined their family at Skidmore College for a summer jazz program. And I just got to I'm maybe 15 and was hanging out with these like incredible musicians and experiencing live music. And it just sort of started to kind of turn the wheels a little bit for me.
Mm.
And he was someone in my life who kept asking me what I was interested in. And
Mm.
eventually I went back there in college and did an internship with them. And through that I got to meet executives from Blue Note Records here in New York City, and
Mm,
made my way south to New York in college as a subsequent internship at Blue Note through that connection. But it really was just about meeting people, telling them what I was interested in, not being afraid to do that, to put
mhm,
myself
mhm,
out there a little bit.
mm,
And another thing I think is that I've tried to really maintain my connections with people.
mhm, mhm.
And that might mean writing a note after you meet someone and reminding them of some piece of your conversation. I mean, I do think the connections that we have with people are just so critical to us in the long haul, being really engaged, and understanding the power of a network that we can build. I really, there's a woman that I went to college with, um, when I was applying for the job at Jazz at Lincoln Center. She said, "Oh, you're never going to believe this. My older sister works there." So I passed my resume to her older sister, and that I think helped me get a foot in the door there. And then it was a little bit crazy, but 12 years later, when I was applying for the job at Carnegie Hall, the same older sister had ended up at Carnegie Hall
Oh,
after,
wow.
two other jobs in between, kind of a thing. Like, it was a
Mm,
really funny circumstance, and we're still working together. I mean, it's just goes to show. I mean, a woman I met at Syracuse, who I actually played in the band, in a symphonic band with, their ensemble there, older sister who helped me get a job 2 times. I mean, it's just kind of a strange
yeah,
circumstance, but I
yeah,
really
yeah.
think those connections matter deeply and have helped
Mm,
me my entire career for sure.
mm. That's great. So sharing your interests widely,
Yep,
and don't keep them to yourself. No one can help you if they don't
exactly.
know what they are. Yeah.
Exactly.
And being connected, staying connected. Yeah.
I
And
think
what goes around comes around, of course, doesn't it? Yeah.
exactly. I think
Mm,
the other thing is, as I've gotten older, just learning to admit what I don't know. I
mm,
think at a young age, I felt the
mm,
pressure of having to always have an answer, to be driving forward, to be successful and achieving, whatever it was that I was being tasked with. That could have been
mm,
my parents, my professors, my future bosses and managers. Um, and now I think I'm a little bit less like, it's okay. Like, let's just talk about
mm.
what we don't know. Um,
Yeah.
and I think always having to have a solution in front of you is actually problematic, because you might not even be asking the right question.
Mm,
So
mm.
that one I've had to learn, to take it down a notch and just to be open and a little bit vulnerable about what I don't know and admitting that. Um,
Yeah. And it takes confidence, I think, and to get to that place, because I certainly my experience when I was younger was I was so desperate to kind of fit in and doing
exactly.
the right thing and saying the right thing.
To be
Being
successful.
vulnerable wasn't an option. It didn't feel
Right.
like.
Exactly. I don't know. And I don't know if the world has changed around us a little bit too, that people are more accepting of these things. I think both must be true, but
Mm,
that hopefully the world is evolving in that way, but also in our culture, and especially like women in the workplace, our roles as women in the workplace. Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's all evolving for the better.
yeah, I do too. And it's, the world's more complicated now. I think we've all realized or have to accept you can't solve problems on your own. It's much better when there's a
Absolutely.
group of you thinking about it from different angles.
I
Yeah.
completely agree.